Beirut's port blast, 2 years on, thousands of lives upended and still no justice for the victims and their families. Plus, an exclusive interview with Lebanese Foreign Minister Abdallah Habib. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. August 4th, 2020, a fire in Beirut's port spreads to a warehouse storing ammonium nitrate, causing an explosion and shockwave destroying thousands of homes and businesses. More than 200 people were killed, thousands wounded. 2 years later, the emotional toll on the families lingers while the case remains unsolved. We'll have more on that later in the program, but first a look at some of the broader challenges facing the country, including an economy the World Bank calls the worst the world has seen in 100 years. I spoke earlier with Lebanon's Minister of Foreign Affairs and Emigrants, Abdallah Habib.
Minister, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start by talking about the Lebanese economy. The economy crashed in 2019, and right now the country is 3 years into an economic and financial crisis. If we look at some of the numbers, the Lebanese pound has lost 90% of its value. Food prices have gone up 11-fold. What is your assessment of where things stand right now?
Well, you know, we also spent like a couple of years without the government to take decisions. We have been, since we came in last September, we have been working on a lot of things, among them an agreement with the IMF, still to be ratified by the parliament. And it would be, we are hoping that this month or early next month, it would be ratified fully. And we also held elections, as you know, and successful ones. We still have the results of the elections that are not interpreted in terms of new government, and we have to have a presidential elections next, starting 1st of September. The period for 2 months, we can elect them president. So we know we face a lot of problems that is affecting the economic scene, but the economic scene would be in place whenever we agreed or we ratify the IMF agreement.
So besides the IMF loan that you are negotiating right now, what are some of these structural changes that have been made in Lebanon itself?
Well, it has to do with capital control. It has to do with the exchange rate. We have multiple exchange rates now. It has to do with the banking sector and the central bank. All of these are things that we have agreed with the IMF to ratify them or make suggestions to the agreement of IMF.
I want to turn to another issue now, which I'm sure is of critical importance to Lebanon. And these are the negotiations that are taking place with Israel. And this is on delineating your shared border in the Mediterranean Sea. These talks are being mediated by the United States. And of course, this is important because it will determine which country controls the oil and gas reserves in that part of the sea. What kind of progress has there been on that issue?
There has been good progress. The American envoy was here last Friday, and he acknowledged that there has been a lot of progress. And the reasons for progress is that the world needs gas. Israel has invested a lot in the Karish oil field or gas field, and we want to have demarcated borders with Israel. So there are a lot of reasons to speed up the negotiations and to reach one, and we are hoping that we will reach it soon.
Are you confident there will be an agreement soon?
I am, I would not bet on it, but yes, I'm confident of the talks we had with the American envoy. We think that we will reach an agreement in early September.
And once that agreement is reached, what kind of impact would it have on Lebanon's economic stability, on foreign investment, on the recovery in general?
Well, first, I mean, we did start, unlike Israel. Israel has a a gas field that it can extract from it gas anytime. Now, once we reach an agreement. But in our case, we still have to explore, we still have to dig, and we have to, find gas. It will take 5-6 years before we're able to get any penny from gas if we find it. But this would give our people, would give also the international community some kind of relief on Lebanon, that we have a future, that there is something coming. Until we prove it, of course, that there's something coming. There would be kind of optimism, which is helpful in times of economic downfall.
Now, one of the other big challenges that Lebanon faces right now is the fact that the country is host to something like 1.5 million Syrian refugees who have fled the violence in that country. Now, there is a plan to repatriate these refugees back to Syria, and Lebanon wants to implement that plan over the objections of the United Nations. What can you tell us about the plan and how it will unfold?
We really don't have a plan. There are some people, they say they won't send them by force, but this is not the government position at all. We want the negotiations. We think that these are not political refugees. They constitute no threat to the regime in Syria, and they constitute no help to the regime in Syria. I think Europe is afraid that if they go to Syria, they may go back to Europe, and they don't want more refugees there. But we have disagreement with the donor community, and we're negotiating on that. We're talking because Lebanon cannot afford having 1.5 million refugees in its midst, because it would change. Besides the economic burden that create on us, put on us, it will change the character of the country. We have a very balanced demographic character, and so we don't want to change it. And this is the whole Arab countries also don't want to change it. But these refugees, whether they are in Lebanon, in Jordan, or in Turkey, they are a source of foreign exchange for the regime. And therefore, the regime is not in a hurry, should not be in a hurry to get them back. And therefore, the international community, international donor community, instead of waiting for the regime to come, they should do something to help them go back to their own country. So there would not be a threat in their existence, their presence, or a burden in Lebanon or in Europe for that case.
What about the welfare of these refugees? I mean, we're talking about 1.5 million people here. How has Lebanon been managing that?
Barely managing. We think I'm not saying that they are the cause of our problems, but they are a cause of our problems. They exacerbated our problems here, because the money we get from the donor community to the Lebanese population, it doesn't come through the government. It's weakened the institutions of the government. And also it's barely enough, because even the World Bank estimated that Lebanon cost of these refugees is around more than $3 billion a year, because electricity, water, infrastructure, schools, everything, and land that where they are, everything is free. The government has been giving them. And in return, we're not getting much from the donor community.
Now, looking at other regional relations for Lebanon, I'm talking about ties with Saudi Arabia, with other Gulf states. These ties have been strained. Saudi Arabia used to invest a great deal of money in Lebanon and did a lot to promote its luxury tourist industry. Now there is a blanket ban on exports from Lebanon into Saudi Arabia. What impact is that having?
Well, the most important thing is that we have more than a couple 100,000 Lebanese there, and they are working there. They have no problems there. I mean, we have embassy there and ambassador, and they have here embassy and ambassadors. Okay, the relation is not yet completely open. There are still problems trying to solve them gradually. But our relation with the rest of the Gulf countries is open. And we have no problems with any country with the rest of the Gulf countries. But I'm not saying that we have problems with the Saudis. No, we don't have any problems with Saudi. We want them here. We want them to stay here. And they are most welcome. But as you said, there are still some kind of ban on Saudis coming here. As for investments, Saudi investments, even Lebanese are not investing in Lebanon these days. Until we do the reforms, fix the banking sector and central bank, and put good policies, really there would be no investment in this country, whether it's from Saudi Arabia or from Lebanese themselves.
Minister, one final question, and that is the issue of corruption. According to several reports, there was one report put out by Chatham House, which is the British think tank. There's also reports put out by Transparency International. Lebanon's economic recovery, according to these reports, its recovery and development have been seriously undermined by corruption. In fact, Transparency International rates Lebanon being 24 out of 100 when it comes to corruption. There were protests in 2019 about this, and the government did introduce an anti-corruption strategy at that time. How is that effort proceeding?
Look, this government has been in place since September, and I don't think any of the members of the government has been accused of corruption. Yes, there was corruption. I think now probably the lack of funds that we have, I mean, corrupt for what? There is no money in the country to cause corruption. So I think it is now pretty open. The situation is pretty open, and the situation can be, I mean, anyone can come and we'll show him the accounts or the accountability of each ministry to see that there is no corruption whatsoever. But this is not a reason for us not to be more open and more transparent in the future, even when we have the money.
Minister, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's get to our panel right now. There's much to talk about. Nabil Khoury is a former United States diplomat. He's currently a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and Arab Center in Washington, D.C. Ronnie Hamad founded the Sublime Institute, an international consulting firm. He previously served as an international development advisor at the World Bank. And Nadim Mohsen is a political commentator and lecturer at the Lebanese American University, where he focuses on philosophy and cultural studies. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. And Nadim Mohsen, let me start with you. I want to start with that tragic and disastrous explosion in Beirut 2 years ago. A warehouse full of ammonium nitrate exploded, killing more than 200 people, injuring thousands of others, and destroying large parts of the Lebanese capital. All that remains right now are just a few silos. But what has happened since then? Has anyone been held accountable for what happened? And what of all the businesses and homes that were destroyed in that explosion?
Well, beside the silos that just fell, half of them, yesterday and today, as a matter of fact, just a couple of hours ago, few silos fell. Actually, objecting to the fact that nothing has happened in the past 2 years, absolutely nothing. And the first thing that you would ask when such a tragedy and catastrophic explosion takes place is the truth, some sort of accountability, and nothing of that has happened. As a matter of fact, all that we see is political maneuvering, lip service. And as for the Lebanese public who suffered, half of Beirut was destroyed, actually. It remained on the shoulders of a few individuals, probably some institutions, private non-governmental organizations, throwing a few dollars here and there. But really, nothing systematically had taken place in order to alleviate the pain and the suffering of the people, let alone, as I started saying, the accountability of who is responsible for all of this.
And Nadim, what has happened to all the people whose homes were destroyed in that explosion, whose businesses were destroyed as well?
Well, many of them had left the area. I know I've heard, we've been hearing on the TV, on interviews from individuals participating in the process of actually going through the neighborhoods, looking for individuals who need help, assistance. Many of those people have either left the country or moved away to the mountains, to other areas with relatives, and very few who are capable of probably attracting some assistance from non-governmental organizations were able to re-establish. Plus, obviously, a bit of few new investors who sought to take advantage, or at least who sought to bring back the areas of Gemmayzeh, the port area, and so on.
Right.
In terms of restaurants and some clubs. But really nothing had happened in terms of pumping money and resources into the area in order to systematically bring the area into life again.
Nabil Khoury, Al Jazeera has been reporting that high-ranking government officials and security forces were aware of the risks of storing ammonium nitrate in that warehouse. And since that explosion, the United Nations has called for an investigation, but the UN itself has resisted calls for it to carry out an investigation. In fact, those calls came from Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, among other organizations. But how has this impacted the country? And, I mean, can families ever, I guess, receive or achieve some kind of closure?
Unfortunately, this is not the only incident, although quite possibly this is the worst. But it's an example of things that have been happening in Lebanon for a long, long time. Essentially, crimes of this magnitude do not get properly investigated and do not get resolved. There is a kind of an understanding between the various mafia groups, frankly, that have been controlling the country for a long time. Each group protects the criminals within it. And therefore, if they don't all agree to expose the truth behind the crime, it doesn't get exposed. Therefore, I don't hold much hope that the truth in this matter can be discovered ever.
Ronnie Hamad, that explosion, in the view of some, is symptomatic of Lebanon's dysfunctional government. It has contributed to the country's poor economic and financial situation right now. What do you see as some of the potential solutions to getting out of this?
Well, I mean, as I think everybody mentioned, this is a symptom of a lack of accountability. We're basically on a train that's heading towards the cliff, and there's nobody managing any economic policy to try to reverse it. We need a situation where the central bank is spending $500–600 million a month on reserves to maintain the currency. That's going to run out in 6 to 8 months. What is needed is basically macroeconomic stabilization. The economy has shrunk 60%, the largest decline of any economy in the last 150 years. Inflation is in triple digits, among the highest in the world. And people have lost access to their money in the banks. And so in order for us to be able to move, you have to have some macroeconomic stabilization, deal with the losses that the $72 billion in losses that this banking system has suffered. And the sooner you resolve it, the sooner you're able to restore confidence in the banking system and restore growth. But it all depends on whether the government is serious about undertaking the reforms. The government has a staff-level agreement signed with the International Monetary Fund. If they pursue those reforms, there is a chance. Without it, it's going to be really impossible. We'll be investing a lot.
Nadim Mohsen, I want to get back to the issue of corruption. You know, I was talking with the Lebanese foreign minister just a moment ago about that, and I want to look at the role that corruption has played in undermining Lebanon's economic recovery. And we heard the foreign minister tell us that since the caretaker government took over last September, there have been no reports of corruption. But what is your assessment? Does corruption remain a major problem in Lebanon?
Well, absolutely. The corruption related to the explosion was significant in allowing this explosion to take place. Obviously, there are external factors. The explosion had taken place because there's the material itself, the nitrate, ammonium nitrate. But of course, you had somebody to put it off, to detonate it. And that's the external factor that none of the international countries, including the United States, including France, including Britain, including other countries, have not agreed in presenting any kind of aerial view and imaging to try to help Lebanon find this external factor that detonated ammonium nitrate, which was stored as a result of corruption. Let me just share with you, if you allow me just 10 quick seconds, a report 2 days ago by the World Bank saying these words. I just want to quote words. The public finance in post-Civil War Lebanon is instrument for systematic capture of the country's resources. The excessive debt accumulation was used for creating the illusion of stability. Lebanon's depression was deliberate in the making over the past 30 years. This is right after the Ta'if Agreement. And finally, Lebanon's service provision model is a product of elite capture of state resources for private gains. Now, this is not a report by some communist or some leftist or whatever socialist. No. This is the World Bank. These are the words of the World Bank talking about the elite, corruption, about illusion of stability. You know what they have done in Lebanon since the 1930s? And who were these supported by? These corrupt mafia. Mr. Nabil spoke of the mafia, these mafia people. Who were they supported by? For 30 years, mainly the United States, mainly the Western community.
Yes.
Along with Arab and Gulf states. Reigning the Syrian military government in Lebanon. It was that kind of collusion.
Right. Nabil Khoury.
Corruption to take place. And so I really doubt that corruption just ended in a month or two. This is a rooted corruption in Lebanon. And the only way, in my opinion, to uproot it is by changing the Lebanese sectarian system.
Nabil Khoury, talking about politics in Lebanon, the country will be holding a presidential election in just a couple of months. It could be September, it might be October. But a recent article you wrote for the Arab Center in which you say, and I'm quoting you here, you say, Lebanon continues to face a myriad of intractable problems, including crumbling basic services, a failed banking sector, and spiraling inflation, all of which are clear signs of a failed state. In the current situation, the government must weigh its priorities carefully. Scrutiny into large-scale corruption that is rapidly driving Lebanon into bankruptcy should take priority. That is a major challenge. Do you believe the country's leaders are up to that task?
No, I don't. Unfortunately, and I'm not referring to this government necessarily, because Lebanon is ruled from outside the government and from outside the parliament. The power elite in Lebanon, the people I refer to as mafias and mafia leaders, they're the ones who rule the country, whether they are represented in the government or in parliament or not. And these people are precisely the ones that have robbed this country blind. So, you know, the World Bank report that was just referred to just came out yesterday, and it talks about a Ponzi scheme on a scale of you know, never really heard of in recent times. And this Ponzi scheme has been run by the power elite in Lebanon. for the past at least 10 years in terms of this current crisis. But corruption is older than that in Lebanon. So one does not expect that those who robbed a bank to come back and try to fix the situation to prevent further robberies. So I'm afraid my outlook on this is quite pessimistic.
Ronnie Hamad, one of the issues we discussed with the foreign minister is the big challenge posed by the 1.5 million Syrian refugees that are in Lebanon right now. And as the minister told us, there is no plan to repatriate them, but the government is concerned about the economic burden that these refugees place on Lebanon. And he also said that it's concerned about the demographic effect their presence in Lebanon could have. How do you see this being resolved?
Well, I do think it's an issue that needs to be addressed, and that has some regional implications. But I do think it's a diversion from having to deal with the real economic policy. As our two other speakers just mentioned, I mean, you have an economy that's contracted 60% in the last 2 years. You have inflation out of control. You have the currency that lost 95% of its value, and the people who are the economic policy team is still in place. The president is still in place that oversaw this economic policy. So it's hard for me to, I mean, as much as the Syrian refugee issue is important and needs to be addressed and does have some regional implications, but I think the real heart of the problem is trying to address the financial and economic crisis that the country is facing and continues to face, and it's quite, heading in a very dangerous direction.
And that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.